I'm going to turn it over to Sarah. Will you kick us off with the land acknowledgement?
Sure thing. So welcome everybody. Glad to see you all on this really beautiful evening. I'll start us off with our land acknowledgement, and that is that Open Democracy does our work on Indakina, which is the ancestral homelands of the Abenaki, Pennacook, and Wabanaki peoples, past and present. And we're extremely grateful to their stewardship of this land and these waterways, and that their work has brought the land has facilitated our gathering here tonight. And I'll turn it back over to Olivia.
Yep.
Well, thank you all for being here for our Be Election Worker training. And we are recording today because we heard from a few folks that couldn't attend. So please note that we're recording, and I don't know just what happened to my screen. So apologies that something strange just happened. I'm gonna come back to my slides. There is a lot of information in the slides that so do not feel like you need to scribble it all down. We will share slides afterwards, and we are available for questions. We're going to cover sort of who is an election worker who's elected. So we have moderators that are elected for 2-year terms. We have selectmen who are elected normally for a 3-year term. Selectmen sometimes have other duties like city councilors. And we have supervisors of the checklist who are elected for 6-year term. We also have volunteer poll workers. There's some really important election worker duties. We have greeters and ballot clerks. But I also wanted to say that we also have pro tem elected officials. So any absence, if somebody is sick or ill or had surgery and not able to fill their duty, there are also abilities for election workers to fill in absences of anyone who is elected. So there are many different jobs and roles on election day. Over to Sarah.
So another position that is a volunteer appointment is the ballot clerks or ballot inspectors. I know that some places they get maybe a small stipend, like in my town, I get a small stipend for working, but I don't know if that's universal. It might not be. The main job of the ballot clerk or ballot inspector is to sit at that booth, and as the voter comes to you, you're going to ask them for their, let me bring up my handy checklist. You're going to ask them for their name, address, and in the case of the primary, their party affiliation. And then you go through a couple of processes. If they have all the correct ID, then you just sign their name into the checklist and give them their ballot, and they go on their way. Oh, and here's an example. So if they have all the correct information, you just put a little check next to their name, hand them their ballot, and they go on their way. If they're missing something or something needs to be changed, that's what all this red pen is. So there's different processes depending on what the voter has. And if you're not sitting at the checklist station handing voters their ballots, you could also be sitting at the table that helps voters change their party affiliation for the primary, changing it back if they're an undeclared voter and they want to change back to undeclared, or adding names to the checklist if they're a totally new voter.
Great. And so on primary day, the duty of asking undeclared which election they would like to vote in and writing Dem or REP over the undeclared box is your job on September 13th. On November election day, you will not have to do that because everybody gets the same ballot. You're supposed to use a ruler and a pencil and draw a line through their first name. When I have been ballot clerk before, the big tricky thing is juniors and seniors. So, you know, a dad and a son with the same name, making sure you get the right one. There are ways for you to put red pen if somebody has gotten married and changed their last name, but they also have to check in with the supervisor of the checklist to officially have their name changed on the checklist. An important job, and this is the most important job to improve voters' experience, is the greeter. The greeter job is kind of standing at the door, asking people, are you registered? Oftentimes they have signs that say voters from A to G, but there's a line of people in front of the A to G. So the greeter helps kind of make sure people are in the right line. Or if somebody is unregistered to vote, they can direct that to the supervisors of the checklist, because it's a real shame when a voter stands in line to get their ballot and then has to be turned over to the other line to register to vote. So a greeter is a really important role, and anyone who's a first-time election worker, a greeter is a great way to start. And please note, greeters cannot do any electioneering. That is all election workers cannot do any electioneering, but especially the greeter. The greeter also has other responsibilities. So if you're in a city with multiple wards, making sure people are in the right ward, and also encouraging people to have their photo ID ready for when they get to the check-in station. Over to Jean Lightfoot.
Okay, I'm a supervisor in the town of Hopkinton, and I'm going to start off by saying that we basically, as a supervisor, you do there's a lot more work beyond just being at the polls on election day and being friendly and registering people to vote. There is a huge, we put many hours in before and after the elections to make sure that checklists are updated and all the data is reported to the Secretary of State. But on election day, that's what we're here for. So the main job that we do on election day is register new voters. And this year, there's going to be a little glitch in that if someone doesn't have an ID or proof of domicile or citizenship, then they will have to have their picture taken. They can't just fill out a form like they have been up until now. So that's going to put a little glitch in our system. We are paid in our town anyway. I don't know how they go for how they are in other towns. I think some of them are paid and maybe some are not. It's different in the cities. The wards supervisors of the checklist don't have as much work to do before and after as we in the towns do. The other thing that we do is that, like Olivia was talking about, or Sarah, I think, was talking about changing back from, if you walk in as an undeclared voter, then you are allowed to change back on election day, on the primary day, and we maintain that list. We have a list that we print out the day, a couple days before the election, of all those voters in town who are undeclared as of that time, so that all they have to do to change back to undeclared is just to come and sign off on the checklist under their name, rather than filling out a whole card to change back, and they can do it right on that day. The other things we do is we work with the moderators and the town clerk at the end of the night, to help reconcile the numbers of ballots that are given out and by the ballot clerks, and the people checked off on the voting list, plus the number of ballots that have run through the machines. So that's pretty much what we do. And then the next day at 9 o'clock, we gather in our little room where we work and start preparing and reporting all the information to the Secretary of State.
And I think the supervisors of the checklist have a little bit harder work on primary day because of the really sort of accounting for the undeclared who are switching their party back. which takes a little bit more time and effort on the September election, which they don't have to do. But as we see in these 3 slides, the supervisors of the checklist have work to do kind of year round, maintaining the checklist, registering anybody who registers to vote. They're required to hold meetings before an election. They have duties on election, and then they have lots of duties after the election to update anybody who's newly registered.
Yes, generally we're working all day Wednesday and all day Thursday, and on a big election, like November will be a big election for us. We'll probably work part of Friday as well. So it takes us a good 2.5 days working, 6 or 7 hours those days as well. And we start, I forgot to mention that we do work all day on election day. We show up at 6:15 in the morning, and we don't usually get out until around 8:30 or 9 that night. And we do in Hopkinton, we don't stick around if the ballot clerks can't get if everything doesn't reconcile right that night. Well, what we will do is take all the books, and then the next morning, first thing, that's what we do, is sit down with the books and reconcile our numbers again. And if we can't do it, then we go back over and over and over and work with the town clerk's list of absentee ballots until we get, if not exactly on numbers, very, very close.
And this is, each polling place is unique. So Jean says, they reconcile the next morning if the numbers don't match. Our moderator doesn't let us leave unless the numbers match. So we just stay until the numbers match. So I'm going to chat about the job of selectmen. The law says selectmen. I have added select women because there are men and women who do this job. This job there is some duties before the election. This job is, you're responsible for budgeting and sort of which jobs get paid. I know that as a select or city councilor, in my case, we did increase the wages to try to recruit more people to different roles. And we are responsible for making sure the tables are set up and that the room is appropriated. But I will say, in a lot of places, you have your town municipal services that help you set up the tables. So you're not really responsible for moving tables. But we're responsible for doing some other staffing so that you don't have long lines. And on election day, the Constitution requires that selectmen are present, 2 selectmen in each polling places. And selectmen assist the moderator, so help process absentee ballots on election day. I feel like as a select person, I've covered a ballot clerk job, I've covered a supervisor checklist, because our job is to make sure everything is staffed. And so if people have a lunch break, we cover. And so we're also, the important duty that we have at the end of the night, at the beginning of the day, we make a motion to open the polls. And at the end of the day, we make a motion to close the polls. And we're also responsible for signing all of the boxes of ballots over a seal that no one can break at the end of the day, and ensuring that those sealed containers are delivered to the town or city clerk. I wanted to share this report from the Brennan Center. The Brennan Center shared this report after they did a poll of all local officials throughout the country, and said about 20% of election workers are planning to leave before the 2024 election. And so it's really important that we recruit a whole new generation of poll workers. We've had many poll workers that have done this job from retirement into their 80s. And it's time for a whole new generation of poll workers needed. And if this number is really true, 20% of poll workers in 2 years, we have a lot of recruitment work to do to find new faces and make sure they're trained before many of those poll workers no longer run. Sarah, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Yeah, so the big question, how do you get involved? You've seen the rules, you're interested, and now well, if you have some sort of relationship with your election officials, you can just go ask like your supervisor of the checklist or your select person. But if you don't know who any of those people are, you're gonna find your town clerk, town or city clerk, and they will be able to direct you in the right place and get you involved. So this list of towns and cities is where we know there are currently openings. There may be other openings. So if your city or town is not in this list, please check anyway. But there's openings in Bennington, Bow, Carroll, Concord, in a couple of the wards 2, 4, and 5, Croydon, Dover, wards 1, 2, and 3, Franklin, ward 2, Keene, ward 1. Keene, ward 1 is where I'm going to serve. So if you want to join me in Keene, ward 1, please do. Plymouth, Milford, Nashua, and Wyndham.
And also, if your supervisor or your moderator or your town clerk says we're full, say add me to the list in case somebody gets sick. And they're also really grateful to have a list of names of people who they can call if something falls through. We have covered a lot of ground, and I want to open it up for any questions that the group might have. I see somebody is here from Dover, so let us know if you're interested.
And it looks like the question is, do you need to live in the ward where you want to serve? And the answer would be yes. Yes.
Yes, although I will say that I know Manchester was really short, and Manchester was able to take some Concord volunteers the day of because they had staff shortages. So there's certain roles that you have to live in your ward in order to serve, and there's other jobs like a greeter that you don't have to. And I'm going to go to Judith or Bill for a question.
Judith. Someday we're going to change that name. In Franklin, as you know, we have more than enough people in Ward 3 to volunteer. 2 of my neighbors who have been recently widowed decided they are now available to get out and do things in their community, but they haven't been called upon yet. But the other part of that is we have Ward 1 and 2 who do not have enough workers, but those women cannot go into another ward to help out. I would almost hope that there would be some way of making an exception to that rule, because we have 2 people who are eager to help. They really want to do it, and they're very bright, competent women, and they can't do it because they're in the wrong ward. So there's
because the job that Franklin needs is a supervisor of the checklist, and the state law requires, that person. But there are ways that they, if somebody can't be found, they can deputize somebody who doesn't live in that ward.
So in Ward 2, it's a supervisor of the checklist that's needed?
Ward 2, they need 2 supervisors of the checklist.
Oh, I thought they had been clerks or something. Oh, okay.
2 supervisors of the checklist because they had moved out of town.
Okay. What about Ward 1?
Ward 1 is a ballot clerk. So, but I just talked to the city clerk a few hours ago, and I think they found a Ward 1 ballot clerk.
Okay. And Lori McDonald volunteered for Ward 2. Oh, McLaughlin.
Okay, wonderful.
Peter's wife.
Yes, Claudia.
I signed up for this because I had gotten a call, I think, from the Democratic Party saying that they needed poll observers. So I'm a little confused as to being a poll worker versus a poll observer. I mean, because I live in Ackworth, and I think the supervisors of the checklist and the poll workers are all those positions are covered. I can double check with people, but if you could clarify, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, so there is other jobs on election day, which is a poll observer, and the parties try to recruit people to observe to make sure there's no problems. That's a separate training than today. We'll be doing some nonpartisan poll observer trainings, but I do know that the parties, both the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, both do poll observer trainings where they have a checklist. They want to make sure there's enough parking, the lines are moving, everything is staffed properly. And so there are jobs to do that are not the election worker jobs. But today we're just sort of talking about the election worker jobs.
Okay. I actually did an election worker job filling in for somebody who was sick one time, but so, I mean, it's interesting. And so thank you.
So how was your experience, Claudia?
It was fine. It was a day, it was a couple of years ago on a town meeting day in March when we had a really, really, really terrible snowstorm. I don't know if people remember that. And I ended up staying overnight with a friend who lives very near the town hall because there's no way I would have been able to get home that night. But it was, it was an interesting experience. There wasn't anything particularly difficult about it. I did get myself in a little bit of trouble because in a small town, I know a lot of people, obviously, and one person came in and she was a little confused about who she was going to be voting for. And I said, well, there are some people running for, and I just named the positions, and I think, maybe how many candidates there were for those positions or how many people she should vote for in each position. And the supervisor came over and said, no, you can't talk about that. She can go look at the ballot herself and check it out. And it wasn't as if I was saying, oh, I really support this candidate. It was just telling her basic information, like,
Yeah, but they want to make sure there's no electioneering whatsoever in the polling place. Somebody once said to me after they had gotten their ballot, they had a question like, do I vote for 2 or 3 in this position? And I was like, unfortunately, because you've crossed the threshold, I can't answer those questions, but you can ask somebody who's on the other side of the polling place. But there are instructions, so read your ballots. I think it's really important. One year we had ballots where you had some elected officials on both sides of the ballot, and I was very careful before handing people the ballot. Make sure to turn it over and vote on both sides of the ballot, which was just a good instruction to give when giving out the ballots. But I made sure I gave that instruction uniform to every voter who came and got a ballot. I see that Sue Nastasi's is also a supervisor of the checklist. Judith is a supervisor of the checklist. So we have a couple of other supervisors of the checklist. Bev Cotton has experience of working with her city clerk to help identify, our town clerk to help identify poll workers. So Sue, can I ask you how your experience has been as a supervisor?
Okay, well, actually, all right, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, good. Okay, well, my experience started with training being rescheduled like maybe 3 times because of COVID. And so, so when I was told yesterday with the traveling information of Bud Fitch and Tricia of the updates for the new laws and what to be aware of for this upcoming primary for the elected officials. It was referred at the beginning for all of those that remember 2018 or pre-COVID. And I was like, it beats me. I had to learn the COVID way. And so my experience has been a lot of these, what they call them, sneeze guards. And yeah, it's been more setting up in interesting manners. But the greeters are, yes, Yes, my excitement yesterday morning was to get that.
So it's actually really interesting. This book is the election procedural manual. Mine came in the mail today.
Oh.
It is now 450 pages. I looked at last year's book, which was under 400 pages. And then I pulled out the book from the 2 years prior. And I feel like we've gained more and more pages each year as the election workers of duties and responsibilities and state laws that we need to understand. But don't let this book scare you from being an election worker, because most jobs just have a couple of pages about their job specifically, unless you're a moderator, and then you have lots and lots of things to do as the moderator. Judith,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Can greeters be in any ward?
Greeters can be in any ward, correct?
Okay, because I was just thinking of those two women that want to do something. If they don't have greeters in 1 and 2, then, you know, I should pass that along.
Yeah, and I think greeters are a very important job.
Yeah.
To make
Mhm.
sure, you know, people who aren't registered, you know, making sure the lines are, it's the voter's first experience being
Right,
greeted,
right.
by a polling place.
Okay, I'll look into that. Thank you.
I have something to add too, that just kind of following up on what Claudia was talking about, that one of the things that I had, that same training that Sue had only a couple days ago, that people, if one of the reasons maybe that the supervisor jumped on you like that, Claudia, is that people don't always know what they're seeing. And so they may have seen you talking with the voter and showing the ballot and you know, looking at the ballot, and someone standing outside might not realize that you were just, you know, generally explaining what it was, not who to vote for. So, but that's something that the moderators especially have to be very aware of, is as they're like taking, once the ballot, the counting machines get full of ballots, that they take them out and put them in a box, that they announce what they're doing. And so that someone doesn't think they're stuffing, you know, removing ballots that aren't going to be counted. So and just to do it very slowly. So there is that issue we have, especially this year. I think that we just make sure, we as election workers make sure that we let people know what we're doing and why we're doing it. That we're not bringing in suitcases of ballots.
Yeah, I remember that being emphasized also during yesterday's training. Yeah, Portsmouth was packed. People still signing in just a few minutes after 9,
Yeah,
and Bud Fitch wanted to get going at 9, but it was packed.
We had over 100 people in Newport even, so yeah.
Yeah.
So this week is the week where the Secretary of State is doing the trainings throughout the state. So there's trainings almost every day. So anyone who signs up for those roles, it's good to sort of sign up this week so that you can go to a formal training by the Secretary of State next week. So they're kind of traveling throughout the state, going north and south and east and west, to get to different points to make sure election workers are trained. But when we think about it, there are 309 polling places throughout the state of New Hampshire. And if each polling place has 3 supervisors of the checklist, several ballot clerks, a moderator, a clerk, 2 selectmen, you're looking at a dozen people minimum per polling location. But you are required a ballot clerk for every 600 voters that you have registered in your polling place. And so in communities that are larger, they have a much bigger bench of ballot clerks, many more tables to sign in. And the town of Durham on a general election might have 100 staff inside the polling place. Because there's a lot of people who register to vote for a very first time. Plymouth, other college communities have larger influxes of volunteers needed for polling place. Yes, Judith.
That brings up a concern. And Christine and I, who's Ward 1, we've been going to every one of the trainings, and we're going to go again on the 31st of August. And we're the only ones from Franklin who have gone to any of the trainings. And it feels to me like if you're going to be a supervisor of the checklist, you should show up at those trainings, especially if it's your first time ever working at the polls. And so there really is no requirement, is there? They can just fly by the seat of their pants when they walk in there.
I'm going to the training on Monday, so I'll be a Franklin worker who'll go to a different training.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Unlike the
and-
person that just signed on.
Yep.
I
The
don't know,
other
but she'll
thing
know.
that does happen, and they also need volunteers for, is when polls close.
Yeah.
They often call in a team of volunteers to help with counting. So that is also another duty. If you feel like, you know, I can hang out on election night after the polls close,
Mhm.
because every polling place has to do sort of these worksheets of how many ballots were cast that day, how many people checked in at the check-in tables, and really doing all of that end of night accounting. And it is really helpful to have some new volunteers that show up once polls close to help with that part of the job duty. Because I can tell you that we're all really tired when we get to that point after the polls close. You can feel the energy of like, okay, let's put things in stacks of 25 and count our stacks of 25 to make sure all of those numbers reconcile. But you know, I'm not as lucky as Jean. My moderator makes us stay until we reconcile, and Jean's moderator lets them count one more time the next day.
Same here, that we stay.
You stay on election. I would say it's common. It's more common, I think, that moderators make you stay and do all the reconciliation and pack everything up that evening. Hopkinton, I think, might be unique.
Our moderator doesn't, we don't ask, we just say, okay, once you're done with the phone, we're gonna take them. And if you're not, we'll let you know by 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. And it's okay. Because it, like, we agree with that. But by that time of night, if you can't reconcile within, once or twice, going back over those books once or twice, you're not gonna get it. And it just, within, half an hour at 9 o'clock the next morning, we've got it. So it
Yeah,
just,
I see there's a few people from,
the moderator, I mean, she can't really stop us if we decide we're gonna leave.
that's true. And you have a really nice moderator in Hopkinton.
I suppose, but they're not gonna do that, so.
I see that there's somebody from Hanover or from Peterborough. How do things work? Have you volunteered before? Are you willing to volunteer this time? Calling on Marcia King or Leanne or Jean? Go ahead.
So I just moved to New Hampshire 3 years ago, and I've never done any, election work before. But I decided that this year I wanted to look into it, and I didn't know there were so many roles. So this has been very useful. And I also, like somebody else, I don't remember who else said it, but I also was thinking perhaps just being a poll watcher, which now I understand is a completely different thing, and I have to go to the party for that. And so I guess a quick question about that. So if I did want to be a poll watcher, I would get trained by the party that I'd be going to, or?
So there's a couple of different people that do poll watching. So the Democratic Party does poll watching, the Republican Party does poll watching, but we also do some nonpartisan poll watching. So Sarah posted in the chat that Open Democracy is doing a poll watching training a week before the election, or September 8th rather, so not quite a week before the election. And we'll do some what we call it, they're roaming nonpartisan observers. So we'll ask you to go to 5 and 6 different polling places and go through a checklist of, is there adequate parking? Are people waiting in line more than half an hour? Are people being turned away?
You can go to any, you don't have to go to your own polling place. You can go to any polling place in my town or just anywhere.
Anywhere in the state, yeah.
Okay, and I don't need any credentials or anything to walk in. So I just say, oh, okay.
Well, we'll go through the poll watcher training. You can't go past the guardrail if it's not your own polling place, but you can stay outside of the guardrails. And there's lots of rules about observing in the polling places, but our polling places are all public and open to anyone to see what is happening, which is quite amazing that New Hampshire has that ability for everything to be done in the public. All of the counting is done in the public. It's all observed. All of the machines are tested at an open public meeting prior to an election. So there are lots of safeguards, and we tried to make it simple tonight, but there is a little bit of complexity that each role has because of our election laws. And it is important for election workers to understand our election laws. Yes, Marcia?
Yeah. Hi, Olivia and everybody. Yeah, I'm interested in volunteering. I'm not sure exactly what I'd like to do at this point, and it's kind of hard to get in. And somebody did ask me to take their place on November 3rd, and I thought that job sounded pretty tough for that day, and not knowing, and I haven't gotten back to her in 2 weeks. And I do need to give her an answer. And I don't want to start at the top. I feel like I need to work my way up to something simple to something a little more, I don't want to start complex. So something such as supervisor of the checklist, that would be a hard beginning.
Well, and also sometimes you could say, could I observe you on primary day? Could I observe you in this role? So you can understand what that role is. And so the September 13th primary is a good day to say, and I always say greeter is a good first role too. There are like Sarah's clerk in Keene gave her a shift. She only has to come half the day. I'm totally jealous that she doesn't have to go at 6 o'clock in the morning the whole day. And I think the Milford town moderator does 3 shifts. He breaks the election day into 3 shifts. And so by having more people, it does allow you to have a little bit more, you're not committing to a 14-hour day. Yes, Jean?
Okay, thanks, Olivia.
Oh, I saw Jean Lightfoot on mute.
Okay.
Yeah, I was going to just add ours is the same way it's our town clerk that sets up the ballot clerk schedule, and she has them. Most people come for half the day. So, and it's better because it's an important job, and you, by the end of 14 hours, having gone through that checklist, checking it, you're going to make mistakes, and so it's better to have the fresh eyes there. And
towns can only have shifts if there's enough people.
Exactly.
And some towns are even struggling to find the bare minimum amount of people needed. But it is great that some communities have others.
Lucky.
Okay, thank you.
So yes, Bob. You're muted. We can't hear.
Oh, I ought to know this by now. I have a couple of questions, and I'll begin with taking my hand down. Is it any one person's responsibility to keep track of electioneering in the polling place?
That is the moderator's duty. The moderator's duty. So the moderator is primarily responsible to make sure that there is no electioneering. But I will say that ballot clerks, if they see somebody with an electioneering hat, the moderators have empowered them to ask them to take the hat off. Or the greeter is often the first step there that will say, no, you can't come, or you need to take your pin off, or you need to take your shirt off. Or your campaign sign needs to go in your car, you cannot bring it into the polling place. So the primary, the manual tells us that it's the moderator's job, but I will say that many other roles will see those individuals first.
And is it legal to electioneer outside the polling place? with whatever material, hats or sweatshirts or whatever.
Yes, electioneering is allowed outside the polling place. It is only allowed in the designated electioneering zone. Each polling place sets up, I kind of call it mine is a roped off area in my polling place, but they do have some polling places allow you to be kind of next to the door. Some people like you across the parking lot, but each polling place does have a designated area for electioneering. So people are holding signs or talking to voters as they're coming to vote.
So someone approaching the building to get into the polling place and, is in line, let's say 15 or 20 feet, which would not be within the designated electioneering section. That is prohibited.
Yeah, so in this manual, Bob, I don't know if you see it, but they definitely have like how the flow of traffic will help things move. So people can come in and flow, the flow of traffic. And there is a state law about how many feet you have to be from the polling place. And I don't have that in front of me, but if somebody wants to, somebody knows that off the top of their head, they can throw that in the chat, what the state law is around that. Otherwise, I'll find it and email it to you, Bob.
Thank you.
Jean?
Yeah, just one more question. So last week I went to my town clerk and I said, I'm interested in doing, election day poll work. She goes, oh, you're way too late. Come back next March or May. You missed the training, and so come back then. It sounds like, I guess she didn't say they were filled up, but I just assumed that they didn't need anybody else. If it was the case that they did need somebody else, would they attempt to fill in the spot and do the training?
Well, yeah, clearly Marcia was asked to fill a role in November in Peterborough. So if you're also from Peterborough, so there is what I often say to a town clerk. Well, can I give you my name and phone number? And if somebody gets sick or if somebody's not able to make it, you have my contact information. So you can also check back and say, I just wanted you to have my contact information, especially because we're in such a changing world right now where people do get sick or get COVID or there might be reasons why people can't make their duty as an election worker.
So then you'd be allowed to do it even though you didn't go through the formal training.
Yes, they will allow. Yeah, as Judith said, a formal training is not required. It's really recommended. It's helpful. It's really helpful to go through the training, but it's not required.
All right, thank you.
I am not seeing other questions about being a poll worker. I will say that, go ahead, Stephen. Or
It's Chris.
Chris.
Hi.
Hi, Chris.
So I live in Derry, and this is the first time. And how do I get started?
You would contact your town clerk in Derry.
Mm-hmm.
And your town clerk just moved to the city of Nashua. So you have a brand new town clerk in Derry, or your moderator. And I've met your moderator at a couple of different forums. So I'll try to find their name. So you have your moderator's name. But I would go in. I do know Derry is one of those communities that has a good team of poll workers who've done it for many years. And Derry is one of those communities that sometimes has one polling location and sometimes has 3 polling location based on which election. So I would stop by City Hall or Town Hall in Derry first and leave your name and contact information of somebody who's interested in helping. And also say, I'd be willing to serve as a greeter. And then when March town meeting comes around, there are lots of roles that are on the ballot. So in January, you can then file and put your name as an election worker and get elected into some of those roles. So it's also really important for you to know that some of those positions are elected, and some of them are appointed or, volunteer roles. Jean, remind me, it's January that you sign up for the March town meeting to be elected?
Yeah, and I think the deadline is usually like January 31st or something. Yeah, there's a week and they'll announce it. It has to be announced when it's open, and all you do is go in and sign your name. You don't have to get a petition or anything for the local offices. So, yeah, and some of them are hard to fill. I mean, some of them are hard to get people to do it. So.
And pay attention, because some of the roles are 2-year positions and some of the roles are 6-year positions.
Yeah.
So
We're the longest. I think the supervisors are the longest. We're 6 years. So yeah, it's a commitment.
So just to be aware that this year you can do what's called the pro tem, get filled in as one of those, but then and then we said January for a March town meeting, but I think Peterborough has a May town meeting, so you might have to sign up at a different date in Peterborough to be an election worker next year, because they have a May town meeting instead of a March town meeting. And anybody I see people who live in cities, if there's cities, you sign up at a different filing period before your city elections. So not to be confusing, but when you if you're interested for signing up for next year. Great. Well, that concludes our training. Thank you all for joining us tonight and being interested to serve. It is such an important fundamental role to be a poll worker. It's an important civic duty, and we're really grateful that you're interested in filling those roles and finding other individuals to fill those roles. So thank you all so much.